Hey folks, I'm Alex Dowd.
And I'm Katie Rife.
Don't call it a comeback. Movies never left. But for the first time in over a year, some people are feeling comfortable enough to see a movie on the big screen again. On today's episode, Katie and I discuss the new normal for moviegoing in a slowly reopening, increasingly vaccinated world. We then turn our attention to two films vying for yours this Memorial Day weekend. The sci-fi sequel, A Quiet Place Part 2, and the Disney villain origin story, Cruella.
Welcome to Film Club.
All right, folks, welcome again to a new episode of Film Club. I know we've been away for about 3 weeks now, but we're back with brand new episodes. We're going to have a run of those for you. Katie, how you doing?
I'm doing pretty good. I've actually been out to a movie since we last recorded, so, you know, nature is healing.
Yeah, very much so. Yeah, I've attended a couple press screenings at this point. I think we're going to get into today a little bit about how comfortable you and I feel individually about going to the movies again and how comfortable other people should. Again, we haven't recorded an episode in about 3 weeks, so we're back after a brief little hiatus there. And in that time, I feel like the world has changed a little bit. And so we're still very much in the COVID-19 pandemic right now, but there is some light at the end of the tunnel. And I feel as though a lot of people are feeling a little bit more comfortable about re-entering the world now that vaccinations have been made widely available. I am fully vaccinated. You are fully vaccinated. I think that many, I don't know what the percentage is now. I think the last I heard it was something like 40% of the country was vaccinated. That's probably changed.
It's up to 60 for partially vaccinated. That was in a New York Times article I read late last week.
Oh, nice. Okay. So, many more people in this country are vaccinated than were 3 weeks ago, honestly. And I expect that number to keep going up. There will, of course, be holdouts, people who do not trust vaccinations. I don't think we need to go down that rabbit hole. Yeah, let's just not go down that rabbit hole today. The fact of the matter is a lot of people are getting vaccinated. And the other thing is that the CDC has been making announcements about what they are advising people to do or what we can and cannot do or feel comfortable doing at this point. And we're seeing some relaxing of policies. There was some talk that if you're outside and you're fully vaccinated, you don't need to wear a mask. That if you are in a indoor space with people who are also vaccinated, you don't need to wear a mask. It kind of seems to be changing by the day, and there is some endless conversation out there in the world about how much is the CDC under pressure from any political institutions? Are they feeling the crunch to announce these things prematurely? Fact of the matter is, I think that we're kind of at a moment right now where everybody's going to kind of have to decide on some level what they feel safe doing and what they don't. I personally, I'm not quite at the point where I'm going to movies in a general setting yet. Even though, the CDC has said that's something you can do, and I think we're going to talk a little bit more about that today. But at this point, I have attended a couple press screenings. I still feel a little nervous about going to a movie theater with a bunch of people who I don't know and who may or may not be vaccinated.
Yeah, I've been to a couple press screenings too, and the movie I went to was actually like a private screening. Someone rented out a theater, and
nice.
I went to go see that. I haven't been to a general Gen Pop, to use the prison term, screening just yet. But the way that I look at all this is that, the science is one thing, but I think that I personally am comfortable going without a mask outside. I'm fully vaccinated. I am not the most risk-averse person out there. And I think that it truly is about like your personal risk threshold and just thinking about what you're comfortable with and what you're not. I think the pandemic has made people think about risk in a way that they normally didn't. For example, if you read news articles every day that was about car crashes and how deadly it was to get into a car, then you would probably be a little more nervous about getting into a car. But we don't think about that because it's not on the front page every day.
Yeah.
But it is risky to get into a car also. And so, at this point in the pandemic, the numbers are trending downward and vaccinations are going up. Herd immunity is 80%, and I've read some experts say that they're not sure that we're ever going to get there in the U.S., which is discouraging.
Yeah.
So it is going to kind of remain in the background for a long time. But for me, this is something that we'll talk about in a little bit, because when I interviewed experts, they were all about, coming up with this individual calculus. The term they used was risk tolerance. And there are different layers to it with every activity. I still wear a mask inside just because there's a lot of mistrust because of the way that the rhetoric and the politics have played out in this country with the pandemic. There's a lot of mistrust of whether people are telling the truth about being vaccinated, and I totally understand that. And also, kids don't have vaccines yet, so parents of young kids, and then there are people who are immunocompromised who might want to keep wearing a mask forever, and I'm totally cool with that. I'm certainly not going to stop someone on the street and tell them that they're an idiot because they have a different, risk tolerance than I do,
Yeah. I think it's an optics thing too, honestly. I mean, I feel comfortable wearing a mask in some situations, simply because it might make other people in those environments feel a little safer themselves,
Right.
Like, I don't know everyone's situation. There are people who are not vaccinated yet, and particularly if I'm sitting in a restaurant, for example, like, if it makes my server feel any more comfortable, yeah, when they approach the table, I'll put my mask on. It's not a huge sacrifice. I don't think it's ever been a huge sacrifice, honestly.
No.
It has been at
really
absolute worst a slight inconvenience,
Yeah, it's really not that big of a deal. Well, that's, another third rail we're not going to touch. I'm just going to very gently poke it. That's why it's so offensive when, you see people compare it to like the Holocaust or something. It's
yeah.
Like, have you never been inconvenienced in your entire life?
Yeah. Well, God. We live in a country that doesn't like to be told that they have to do anything, that might infringe on our individual liberties. The idea of a
liberty to do what?
Yeah. The idea of a collective need in this country that your actions affect other people is something that I think some Americans just do not want to accept,
But like interpersonally, are you like that with everything? You know what I mean? Like if your friend says, "Hey, could you do me a favor and come and help me out with this thing in the house?" And they go, "No, it's my liberty to stay home and do nothing." Like, are you just like that all the time?
Well, some people definitely are. I mean, I think the level of selfishness you sometimes see just on a daily basis in large and small ways, I don't know, it can be depressing.
Yeah, it can be. And so that's why I feel like, I don't know, on the one hand, maybe it is a little bit of an empty gesture to keep wearing a mask when you don't have to. But on the other hand, I really don't see anything wrong with making other people feel comfortable, which is why I keep wearing a mask inside, even though I technically don't have to.
Right. Yep. I agree. So a little bit of background. Back in the fall, when movie theaters were first kind of tentatively reopening, when Tenet was hitting theaters, and when that horrible Russell Crowe road rage movie was coming out as well.
Yeah.
The question was sort of, is it safe to go to movie theaters again? I mean, and the answer was, of course, no, not really. There were no vaccines then. It was just sort of, you were really rolling the dice going to a movie theater. So we ran an article where we interviewed a couple of experts in the field of public health and just talked to them about how safe it is to go to the movies. And it's something that we've been linking to really ever since, for the last few months, anytime we reviewed something, because it felt important that when we were going to review something that was going to be in theaters, we have this disclaimer at the top that was just sort of like, hey, we reviewed this. That doesn't necessarily mean we're saying rush out to a movie theater to see it. If you would like to, just please take precautions and make sure you are informed about the risk, essentially.
Yeah, it's an information. It was there for informational purposes.
Exactly.
Pretty much.
And I feel pretty good about at least for a few months being able to direct people to that, people who had maybe not seen it over the last few months. But recently, it sort of came to everyone's attention that like it was a little outdated at this point. What with the vaccinations happening? So, Katie, you went and you talked to these same two people, and you talked to them about how the situation has changed. So, can you share any of the insights that you got from that with the listeners today?
Sure. The biggest thing that they both talked about was what we were just discussing, which is, individual risk tolerance. And one of the experts I talked to, I asked her, well, how do you figure that out? And she said the main question to ask yourself is, what would happen if I got COVID? Who around me would be at risk? Would I be at high risk? And when you sit down and you figure that out, you can kind of go from there. If you're living at home with like a older parent who has cancer, and so their immune system is not quite there, then you're going to want to be more cautious than a fully vaccinated young single person who lives alone. And if they got COVID, it wouldn't really affect. They could just stay home, and it wouldn't really affect anyone else. And if you work in the public and things like that, all that comes in. So, it is time for everybody to sit down and figure that out for themselves. And then once you've figured that out, they both said that if you are fully vaccinated, going to a movie and wearing a mask the whole time is a low risk activity. It's pretty safe. It's not, it's not the safest thing you can possibly do, but they both described it as a reasonable level of risk in that, it's no more risky than, like I was referring to with riding in a car. It's the amount of risk that we tolerate in a lot of our daily activities. And then on top of that, there are different layers, right? Like if you take off your mask during the movie, that adds another layer of risk to it. And then if you're eating and drinking during the movie, there's another level of risk to it. If it's a full theater instead of a half full theater, that adds another layer of risk to it. And so it is just about individual tolerance, but they did agree that if you're vaccinated and you keep your mask on the whole time, that going to a movie is not an unreasonable thing to do.
That's really useful. It's a very useful thing to know. And I really like that. I actually read the article on the back end of the site last night. And by the way, if you're curious, if listeners are curious and want to read the full article, it is up on the website now. The title of the article is "Time to Return to the Movies?" ? It's complicated, say our experts. And you can check that out, and it does give updated information about this situation and two different sort of takes on it, which are pretty much in alignment with sort of subtle differences in their opinions about it.
Yeah. One was a little more cautious than the other.
Right. Yeah. But what really struck me about about your interview was was that whole section about people determining the level of risk and what they have to potentially lose by doing it, Because I think when it comes down to it, you and I, we're both in our 30s and we're both fully vaccinated at this point. Were we to get sick with COVID with the vaccine, there's a very good chance that we would both survive it, you could say. That was not a guarantee last year, but the vaccine has, and by no means am I a medical expert, so, take anything I'm saying on this matter with some grain of salt, I guess. But the fact of the matter is that one of the things the vaccine does is it really lowers the chance, at least for those who are not in extremely vulnerable age groups and
right.
General groups, it really lowers the chance that you are going to be fatally sick if you do get COVID. So, if you want to go to the movies and you think it's possible that you really have to weigh, like, what is the risk here? And if I do get sick, what will that mean for me? And for you and I think it means that we would probably have a pretty unpleasant time, but we would probably be okay ultimately. Hospitalizations are like way, way down with the vaccine, I think most people just get kind of shitty sick and then recover from it post-vaccine. But again, the situation is constantly changing. I appreciate you talking to the experts about it. And I'm really glad we have this on the site now. Again, the article is available if people want to read it. I think the short version of this is that the situation is constantly changing, but it is safer than it was 6 months ago to go to the movies, assuming you are vaccinated.
It's not a foolish idea anymore. It's just a matter of like how much you want to do while you're there.
Right.
Like if you want to go to the movie theater and not get concessions because that's a lot of time with no mask on, that's totally chill. That's fine.
Here's my thing though. I'm not quite ready to go and like sit in an auditorium full of people on opening night. I think we're going to be looking at one of the things we're talking about today is that more and more traditional blockbusters are in fact coming to theaters again over the next few weeks. June is actually full of films that are sort of courting general audiences back into the multiplex. And I cannot imagine feeling secure sitting in a theater like a packed house on a Friday night for the premiere of In the Heights or something. And I think for me, it's less about the risk and more about how is that amount of sort of general anxiety attached to being around that many people in a closed space, is that the ideal way to watch a movie? You know, am I just going to be sitting there the whole time thinking about like feeling unsafe, you know?
Yeah, I think something that has been, kind of not helpful about the articles that have been written so far is they kind of have contempt for the idea of not being psychologically ready to do things again. And I think that that's not fair, if something gives you anxiety, you shouldn't be forced to do it just because you technically can.
Right.
I think that does a disservice. And, well, this is something that also came up in the article. You won't have packed houses right now because they're not allowed. Everything is reduced capacity. And one thing that the experts said that you can look into if you're wondering about whether you want to go to a specific theater is, did they install a ventilation system? Because that came up a couple times. And some theaters have installed ventilation systems, and that helps a lot. But, maybe your regular mall multiplex might not have done that. And you can social distance too, with reduced capacity. You can just like sit in the top back corner away from everybody.
Very
That's
true.
another way to kind of mitigate your risk at the movies.
Very useful information. To that earlier point, we were talking about people feeling guilted into doing this stuff again. I saw a tweet. I don't remember who wrote it. It was just on my timeline, but it's really stuck with me these last few weeks, which was, a few weeks ago, even people were getting vaccinated. Things were opening up again. And there was this talk that people still wanting to wear masks were somehow addicted to wearing masks. And this person's response was, we're not addicted to wearing masks, we're traumatized,
Sure. And it takes some time to get over that, yeah.
Yeah. A lot of people died last year, and we all felt generally pretty unsafe about being out in the world. I think the notion that people are going to cling to something that makes them feel a little safer as they do re-enter the world, I don't know. I don't think it should be a source of shame for people.
No, I don't. I mean, you can't deny that this whole thing has been highly politicized and there is a political element, but that's no reason to bully people into doing things they don't want to do.
Right.
There are parts of the world where mask wearing has been considered a matter of common courtesy for a really long time.
Yep.
Like, for example, when I was teaching English in Osaka, it was common courtesy that if you had the sniffles, you wore a mask, like on the train and at work. And it wasn't even about protecting yourself from other people. It was about protecting other people from you.
Oh, yeah.
If you're feeling sick. And that's something that I think would be great to have going forward in America. Like, there was almost no flu last year.
Yeah.
Because of mask wearing.
Yeah, exactly. I would love to see something happen with workplace culture where if people were sick, they actually genuinely stayed home. And I'm not throwing around any degree of shade about this because as you know, as somebody who's worked with me for many years, I take this stupid, perverse pride in coming into work, even, under adverse conditions. I'm like, I'm not going to miss a day of work, I can make it there. That's no big deal. But the notion that I was coming to work sometimes when I had a cold or something, I think that one thing that this last year has shown us is that you can easily do your job from home. Many of us can, not everyone. Let me be very clear. Some people cannot do their job from home. But those of us who work in an office setting like you and I can do our jobs from home. So if we're sick, I really hope that going forward, maybe many of us might just stay home when we're sick and work from home. And maybe that will help mitigate the spread of just general sicknesses through the office. Because as anyone who works in this country knows, that often if one person is sick in the office, many other people are going to get sick. Yeah, exactly.
Everybody gets sick in the office. Well, Dowd, I think that there's been a lot of reevaluation of like American workplace culture in general over this past year. Office culture, at least, I should say. Like in my family, there's 5 of us and only 2 of us got to stay home the whole pandemic. Everybody else had to go to work.
Yeah.
So, I've kind of seen different sides of that.
Of course,
situation.
and we've been very fortunate, in that we've been allowed to work from home, and that's something that we can do. So definitely not true of everyone. So what's interesting to me, though, Katie, is that I don't know if you can really totally see a completely straight line trend upward in terms of people going to the movies based on vaccination rates just yet. Like the notion that the world is reopening and more people are going back is not quite borne out by the trends in the box office over the last few weeks.
Right.
The biggest opening of the year was actually way back at the pretty much the beginning of April when Godzilla vs. Kong came out in theaters, and that made $34 million in theaters, which during the COVID era is quite significant.
That's domestic?
That's domestic, yeah. Worldwide,
Okay,
I think it made a lot more money. But the largest week for the total box office has been the week that Mortal Kombat opened, and that was 55 domestic. But Mortal Kombat itself made like 23 the week out the gate. So we've been kind of seeing. I think what's interesting is that it does seem to sort of depend on the movie itself. Like people are looking at it and going, "Is this worth going to the movie theater to see?" Spiral, that one of the more recent, the latest entry in the Saw franchise that opened a couple weeks ago. And though more and more people are vaccinated, that did domestically in its first weekend, that did 8 million, which suggests that there were people who were like, I will see Kong versus Godzilla on the big screen. I don't necessarily need to go see Spiral on the big screen, you know?
Well, you know what's interesting about that? This is a whole other topic of conversation and maybe a whole other episode, but Godzilla vs. Kong and Mortal Kombat, it's interesting they still led the box office because those were on HBO Max.
Exactly. And Spiral wasn't. So that's really interesting, you know, so that people were like, I can watch this from home, but this seems like the kind of movie that I would rather see on the big screen, right?
Mm-hmm. Godzilla vs. Kong, I would tend to agree.
Oh, yes. No, I'm a little sad I didn't see that one on the big screen, even though I wasn't a huge fan of it. It would have been nice to see some of that imagery on a very large screen instead of my television.
That whole middle section when they're down in the center of the earth and the camera's swooshing around like a theme park ride. Yeah.
Totally. So, I don't know. I mean, I think that we are going to see over the next month, and we'll be talking about a lot of these movies on Film Club itself because, again, we're going to be seeing blockbusters again. Blockbusters are returning to theaters, and this Memorial Day is bringing a couple prospective ones, you could say. But the whole month of June, there is at least something kind of bigger coming to theaters every weekend, pretty much. And I will be curious to see how these movies do. Are we going to see real increases? Will that 34 million opening weekend for Godzilla vs. Kong, will that be something that gets easily toppled in the next few weeks? Or are we going to see more people making the choice like, is this a movie I need to see in theaters, or can I see it at home? Because the fact of the matter is, as much as studios are sort of re-embracing the idea that people will go to the movies, they're still hedging their bets a little bit because a lot of the bigger movies opening this summer are doing dual releases, like Black Widow. A Marvel movie is finally opening again in early July. However, it's also going simultaneously to Disney Plus, which means that you do not have to go to the movie theater to see it. Like both of the movies we're going to be talking about today in a little more detail. A Quiet Place Part 2 will be in theaters exclusively for a little over a month, but if you wait, you can see it on Paramount Plus, the new streaming service from Paramount. And Cruella is a simultaneous release as well. So if you don't want to go to the theater to see Cruella, you can see it on Disney Plus. So I don't know. I think that it's possible that distribution has been forever changed by this. It's also possible, as we've discussed on numerous episodes before, that we were moving in this direction already, and COVID just sped it up. I'm very curious. I'm very curious what this summer is going to look like in terms of people going to the movies.
Yeah, I'm interested in, like we were just saying with Godzilla vs. Kong and Mortal Kombat still doing well. That kind of disproves a common fear among distributors, that has kept things from going day and date, meaning, on VOD and in theaters on the same day, which is that they just assume that no one would go out to a theater if they could watch it at home. But that's not necessarily the case with those two. And I also wonder if, as things are more open, people will want to go back to the theater less, like maybe it's a little bit of a novelty to go see Mortal Kombat and it's your big day out, but once the shine wears off, we'll see, if that strategy does end up being bad for movie theater box office.
That's my fear, honestly. That is the fear that I have. in my heart right now about all of this, which is that what the success of Godzilla vs. Kong and Mortal Kombat on the big screen, as opposed to other movies that have braved a theatrical release over the last few weeks, what they suggest, and again, we don't have all the evidence at this point, maybe I'll be completely wrong about this, but it seems to suggest to me is that if the movie looks like something that you have to see, quote unquote, on the big screen, people will go to it. But other movies, people would be perfectly fine waiting to see at home. And, all my life, I have seen people treat the movie theater as something you just go do, and sometimes even going to movies that don't necessarily even demand the largest screen possible. Sure. A new movie is out, you go to the movie, that's a social thing you do. Has COVID changed it so that people no longer think of like going to the movies as something you do on a week-by-week basis? Is it going to exacerbate the increasing move towards just people accepting that they're going to watch a lot of what they watch at home? Spiral, for example. I mean, horror movies are sort of reliable as things that get people out to the movies. People will go see horror movies, whether they have stars or not. If there's a new horror movie, it's like, I will see that in theaters. Why not? No matter how bad they are, no matter how bad they look, they will make some degree of money. And Spiral is by no means a flop or anything, but the fact that it's not making a ton of money and it's not making that Mortal Kombat Godzilla money in theaters suggests to me that maybe that era might be over. And that would make me really sad, honestly.
Yeah. So your kind of worry is that we're going to end up with another situation like we had in the 1950s where it just got... Well, it would be an acceleration of something that's already happening where it's just more and more gimmicks to try to get people to come out to the theater, right?
Yeah,
but that's what happened when TV came around.
Yeah, or even...
Studio filmmaking became very gimmicky for a while.
Exactly, and we talked all about that. We did an episode last fall where we talked about the ever changing relationship between cinema and television, and how these two have been sort of they've been sort of uneasy bedfellows over the years. They've been competitors. I think that COVID has been very good for television as in this ongoing Cold War between the two mediums. I think that television is doing very well, and cinema perhaps less so for obvious reasons. I just fear a future where the only movies that are even getting into theaters are movies like Godzilla vs. Kong or Mortal Kombat, where even the notion that you'd be able to go see something smaller, and I don't mean just like Spiral, I mean much smaller films, indies, for example, where a world where I can't see those on the big screen at all because those are just not the kind of movies that open on the big screen, that's frightening to me.
Yeah, well, I think something to look at in that respect then is specialty box office. Like that's kind of, your smaller theaters, like how's the IFC Center in New York doing?
Right.
And I think that's repertory theaters is something that I'm actually not that worried about, because when you look at, there are some repertory theaters that have very, very loyal followings, right? Like, for example, the Music Box in Chicago and the New Beverly in LA both have very, very loyal followings, and they have both been selling quite well, for like big reopening series. Like the New Bev's reopening next week, and it was like getting concert tickets, trying to get tickets to go see a movie that week at the New Bev, because everyone was just so excited to like go back to the theater. And you have loyalty to these certain rep houses. I think, like you were saying, the part that's in danger is, for example, like the movie Undine that's coming out in a couple weeks. That is a movie that could end up suffering in this new paradigm that you're talking about.
Exactly. Like, people are always going to go see Rocky Horror Picture Show on the big screen. They're always going to go to a rep screening of Jurassic Park or Ghostbusters or something. But will we be able to see something like Undine on the big screen going forward? Or is the distribution strategy for movies that small just going to become you watch it at home?
I mean, yeah, I think that that's kind of on the indie theaters to, market them and program them and build the loyalty that keeps those, those rep houses in business.
It's on the distributors too, though, to some extent. I think both there's a responsibility on both ends there, because if the distributors decide that it's just not worth their while to do a theatrical release at all, which, that costs money, and I guess I could understand, making sure that you can get DCPs to all these theaters, they would play their own part too. I think that both the theaters have to promote these things and get people get people there, but the distributors have to actually make them available to theaters too.
That's true. That's very true. Yeah, the distributors can't just give up.
Exactly.
And filmmakers can play a role in that too, because, there are, this is more on the big Hollywood level, but, speaking of Quentin Tarantino, him and Christopher Nolan and a few other directors have been very vocal about wanting to play movies on 35, and filmmakers could maybe use some of that leverage too to say, no, I want this to be in a theater.
Totally. Although it would have to be a filmmaker with the clout of somebody like Christopher Nolan or Tarantino, Unfortunately, I don't see somebody like Claire Denis or somebody having the power in the States anyway to say like, oh no, you must show my new movie on 35 or something in a theater. Like whoever did A24 or something's going to be like, no? I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. They could put out statements and things like that. Like I would prefer if you saw my movie in a theater. That sort of like soft coercion can have an effect.
Yeah, that's true. The situation is changing. I think that we are going to see, I think this coming weekend, it's now Friday before Memorial Day, so the Memorial Day weekend is in front of us. And I think we are going to see a litmus test this weekend. And I'll be curious to see how the movies that are opening this weekend do. There are two big films that are opening in theaters this weekend, trying to draw people out for the Memorial Day holiday. And they are A Quiet Place Part 2 and Cruella, both franchise films in their own sense, and both movies that in a traditional world I think would probably be hits. It is, again, both of them will also be available at some point at least to watch from home, but they will be in theaters this coming weekend. I want to talk about both those films really beyond whether or not they'll make money. So let's start with A Quiet Place Part 2.
All right, yes.
So A Quiet Place Part 2 is the sequel to John Krasinski's 2018 horror movie, sort of horror sci-fi family drama, I guess is actually how you could describe it. But
sure, yeah.
For those who have not seen the film, it was a big hit, but there may be some listeners who have not seen it. It basically is about a family, the Abbotts, led by John Krasinski's Lee and Emily Blunt's Evelyn. And they are they're living in a farmhouse, and as it becomes quickly clear, they are living this very, very careful and quiet life because the earth has been overrun by these creatures that can hear really, really well and have decimated most of the world population. I will say that the first one does not make it clear the origins of these creatures, but everybody was just kind of like, oh, they're aliens, like they're clearly aliens.
Yeah, you can proceed from the premise that the world has ended, I guess.
Yeah. In the second film, it is made explicit that they are not from this world. We actually get a piece of visual storytelling that gives us the origins of these creatures, confirms that they are aliens. The sequel sort of picks up after the events of the first film. I should say that if you have not seen the first film, you might want to skip ahead a little bit because there is at least one piece of information that we are going to reveal about the first film that I feel like would qualify as a spoiler for that movie.
Yeah, I think I know which one you mean.
Yeah.
And this is actually a sequel that it does help to have seen the previous one. So.
Very much so. I mean, it's building directly on what happens in the first film. So I'm just going to go out and say it again. If you have not seen A Quiet Place and would like to remain pure, I would say skip ahead a bit. Hit
that 15-second skip button a couple times.
Yeah, exactly. So in the original film, our nominal main character, John Krasinski's Lee, is killed protecting his children. So he dies towards the end of the first film. The second film is set in the aftermath of that event. It's about what the rest of the family does after he's gone. But it starts in a way that allows Krasinski to reprise the role again, because we get the beginning of the movie, we basically get a extended flashback sequence to the start of the invasion, basically before the events of the first film. I believe the first film opens on something like day 40 or something, where the family has already sort of learning to adjust to this new lifestyle. And this one takes us straight back to day one when the aliens invade.
Yep. The moment the aliens invade, really. And what's interesting, that sequence reminded me a lot of the beginning of Bird Box. Did you see Bird Box, the Sandra Bullock one?
It's funny, I never did, and I remember people being like, this is basically Netflix's A Quiet Place.
Yeah, but then this sequence is a lot like the beginning of that film. So
interesting.
Those films remain in dialogue with one another.
I don't know about you. I loved the opening 20 minutes of this film or so. I thought that flashback sequence where it sort of starts at a Little League game and then we just sort of see this small, idyllic American town sort of plummeted into death and chaos. I thought it was really, really well staged and exciting. And, it was fun to see Krasinski again in that role. But I really thought this starts particularly strong.
Yeah, one thing that Krasinski's really good at, and the Quiet Place movies, as a result, are he's like really good at tension and release.
Mm-hmm.
That's one of I'd say his biggest talent as a filmmaker, and he uses that quite well in that opening sequence, I think.
Yeah, it's one of the exciting things about this franchise to me, honestly. I mean, I was of the opinion that we didn't necessarily need a sequel to A Quiet Place, that there was that film was ultimately felt self-contained enough that even though it ends on an ellipses, in a sense, I got what I needed out of that premise and that world. And I, in general, kind of felt like the sequel was... I mean, I don't mind that there's a sequel to it again, but in a sense, it felt like the sequel was sort of reiterating that this has been done already, and that we're not necessarily going to get a lot of really fresh variations on this premise. We're just going to kind of do more of it,
Yeah, no, I really felt that this was just the same thing over again, like we said, Krasinski dies in it, but then you replace him with another, kind of scraggly bearded guy.
Yeah, exactly. They kind of come up with a replacement for him because there's a character who we meet in that opening sequence, and he's like another Little League dad. He's played by Cillian Murphy. Himself, obviously a veteran of spookily depopulated post-apocalypses, as the star of 28 Days Later. Murphy, after that flashback sequence where we meet him, the movie jumps ahead and the Abbott family is leaving the farm. Because I believe the implication, and so much in these movies is because there's a relative minimum of dialogue. So much is communicated visually in these films, which is one thing I really like about them, honestly. But it seems that basically the family's entire food supply goes up in flames at one point.
I guess so, and the barn burns down, and maybe the whole place is just it's been tainted. I guess you got to find somewhere new.
Right. Oh, yeah. Maybe I didn't even consider that. I mean, given that this sequel is so much about grief and moving on from the past, I guess the idea that this house is no longer even feels safe anymore might be built into it in a way that I hadn't really considered. But the family ends up leaving. It's obviously now it's Emily Blunt's Evelyn, and then also her now 3 children, including a inconveniently noisy baby. And they leave. They follow some smoke on the horizon, and they find Cillian Murphy's character, and again, somebody they knew from the old ways, and he is now holed up in an abandoned factory alone. He has a hearty grief beard, and
he sure does.
And he's sort of booby-trapped the place, and the movie kind of goes from there. I guess we don't need to go into too much about the plot from there, although I will say that there's not a whole lot of plot in this film. I mean, it's sort of very simple. I think positively, you could, if you wanted to put a positive spin on it, you could say that it's very elemental. I might say that's a little skimpy in the plot department.
Yeah, and the main thing for me with this film that kind of made me be indifferent towards it was that I felt that they were just rehashing a lot of the same kind of emotional beats and, thriller beats, and it was the same thing again, but just slightly reduced. I feel like when you have a horror sequel and you don't actively try to mix it up, it's always diminishing returns, and the characters' choices just get stupider and stupider with every passing film.
Yeah, but this definitely has that part 2 vibe where it's it's not so dramatic that you feel like you stepped off a cliff or something, but it's that minor sense of diminishing returns with it, I think.
Yeah, I remember this from the first one, and that kind of takes the edge off of it a little bit.
Very much so. And what I was saying earlier, and I ended up not following up with that thought, but what I was saying earlier is that I do admire on a whole that we now apparently have a franchise, because The Quiet Place is a franchise now, but one that is about suspense and about avoiding making loud noises. I mean, so much of blockbuster cinema is about how much noise can you bombard the audience with. I really like the dynamic range of the Quiet Place films. There is, of course, plenty of screeching monsters in them as well.
Sure, yeah. You still have... I mean, if anything, the loud banging jump scare has extra resonance in these movies because
Exactly.
you know that means that something, a whole action sequence is going to follow it.
Exactly. And also what Krasinski does is he takes that kind of general strategy of horror movies, which is to prolong that period before the sting, and he kind of makes that into the strategy for the entire film in a way. These long stretches of quiet punctuated by big scares,
Well, if this Quiet Place does continue to be a franchise, one thing that I will look forward to is seeing Millicent Simmons as, the Abbott family's oldest daughter, Reagan. I thought it was great to see her a little bit older and have a little bit more agency in this film. And, as the series goes forward, I think it would be cool to make her into kind of, I don't know, the Ripley of the Quiet Place.
Yeah.
That would be pretty cool. And, the character's deaf, and Simmons herself, she is deaf. And I think it would be really cool to, that is something that is part of the fabric of the franchise. And so I think it would be really great, like I said, to kind of turn her into the Ripley, the recurring element that happens, moving throughout this world. I liked her performance in this film a lot, and I liked what they did with her character.
She's an enormously expressive actor, and I remember being impressed with her. The first time I saw her was in Todd Haynes' Wonderstruck, and she's in that, and I remember thinking that there's almost a silent actor quality about her, and it doesn't just have to do with the fact, obviously, that she's deaf and she doesn't do much speaking in the roles that she's had so far. It also has to do with the fact that she is just an enormously expressive actor who is constantly conveying what's going on with her through expression largely. And I agree that making her, I mean, she becomes the main character of A Quiet Place in this film. And that's one thing I actually really did admire about it. And I would love to see, and here's the thing, there's going to be another one of these. I mean, the only way there won't be is if this somehow flops. And I even think that equation's a little off, because if this does end up not underperforming, I think that somebody might make the case like, well, it would have done a lot better if it weren't for COVID,
Yeah, it's on the bubble. I think releases, have been on the bubble all year, and probably until the fall, there's going to be some, about it.
Exactly, yeah. Maybe a little bit more forgiveness for some of the ones that don't perform as well as they would during normal times. The thing is, though, one of the things that bugged me the most about this film, and generally I liked it, and again, I think that if you liked the first film, there's a good chance you'll like this one too. I think it has not abandoned the values of the first film. It is very much made in the same style, almost to a fault, as the first film. My issue is that this has a total non-ending, and we won't talk about that in too much detail because I would not want to spoil it for anyone, but this is very much a film that ends with a stay tuned for next time.
Oh, absolutely. And I believe I made this comment to you because we were both at the press screening. Like, Spiral did that too. I don't know what it is. Like, just all these blatantly thirsty.
Yeah.
We're not going to finish our thought here, so you're going to have to watch the next one to find out what happens.
I mean, that's the era we're living in, right? I mean, there is this assumed runway of future sequels. I do sometimes miss the era. Spiral's interesting that it does that, because Spiral in some ways is obviously building off of the legacy of slasher movies. And it felt like for a long time with slasher movies, though they would sometimes end with a kind of twist sting for another movie, it would also often feel as though every new entry that you saw was sort of operating under the assumption that maybe this will be the last entry, Yep. It's why you would get so many cheats like a Friday the 13th movie calling itself The Final Friday, and then the very next one like, nope. Sorry, here's another one. But
that franchise is unique, just the way Jason Voorhees is. They're uniquely suited. They can kill him any way they want, and he'll come back.
He can always come back. Yeah,
he can always come back.
But I think the crucial difference is that well, we accepted as audiences the idea that when a sequel ends, there's always the possibility they'll do another one. A lot of the time, sequels in a different era sort of felt like there was no guarantee built into the movie that there would be another one. It sort of felt like, and I think that had a lot to do with studios, basically, their attitude basically being, we will make these until it no longer is profitable for us to make them anymore. So here's a part 2. If it does well, you'll get a part 3. Otherwise, this is it. And that's just not how Hollywood operates anymore, partially because of Marvel and the success of that model. But everything now, I think, is always looking forward, like, oh, this is going to be a whole franchise. And some might say that's a good thing. I sort of miss feeling that these movies could be a little self-contained, you know?
Yeah, the suspense of it, right? You know?
Yeah.
Like, if you know there's going to be more, that's one thing with the Marvel Cinematic Universe that doesn't really work for me, is like, you know, they can kill a character in a Marvel movie, but the character is going to come back because because of the sort of structure of the thing and the ongoing nature of the thing. It kind of takes out the suspense of, like, did they really kill so and so? And I think that, you know, any franchise that operates like that, like including A Quiet Place, it kind of, again, it takes the edge off a little bit.
For sure. I really just would have liked a complete story, in a sense, you know? Because, again, the original Quiet Place does end with a kind of ellipses. It's like the Abbott family story is not over, is what the ending implies. But you could watch the end, and it felt conclusive enough. It felt like, in its inconclusiveness, that was a fine punctuation. It was like, we have reached a triumphant note in which we can end this movie, and we don't need any more. I don't think anybody could watch this sequel, get to the end, and think, I'm good. You know what? Like, this thing has resolved itself.
No, I had several unanswered questions leaving the theater, for sure. Now, if they called the third one A Quiet Place, the final chapter, would you believe it?
I would believe that if Krasinski was involved, I would believe that he earnestly believes that it would be the final one. But the fact of the matter is, I doubt that he owns full rights to this property or universe. So my guess is that no. I guess to answer your question, no. I think the third one would be structured in a way that it would operate as though it were the last one. But if these movies make money, if Part 2 makes a ton of money, and if the inevitable Part 3 makes a ton of money, we're seeing a Part 4. You know?
Yeah, for sure. I just don't trust movies when they say it's the last one anymore. My faith has been betrayed too many times.
Yeah. So, speaking of a studio that is not willing to let something just be over, let's move on to Cruella, and that is Disney's latest attempt to make some old money off of to make some new money off of an old property. Obviously, the last few years, Disney has spent churning out live action or all CGI remakes of its animated classics. We've seen, you know, a live action Aladdin, a nominally live action Lion King, you know, a Sleeping Beauty spinoff of sorts. Dumbo, exactly. There have been several of them at this point. 101 Dalmatians is tricky for them, though, of course, because there already is a live-action one that predates this entire movement. Glenn Close came in and played Cruella de Vil in the 1990s. In 1996, there was even a sequel to that. So it would be harder for Disney to just say, okay, we're just going to do a live-action 101 Dalmatians. It's been done. So what path do they take instead? Why, of course, the origin story.
Of course, the origin story for all those, you know, burning questions you had about, like, how Cruella de Vil got her last name.
Why do we need to know that?
I don't know. That was a question I had watching this. I was just like, I guess someone was clamoring for this mythology. Like, maybe I'm getting ahead of myself, but the movie I would compare this to in a lot of ways is Solo, in the sense that it answers a lot of questions. You know, and you wonder who asked them, but I can see people, because of how Star Wars is and how Star Wars fandom is, people clamoring to know those type of details about Han Solo. But who's clamoring to know those details about Cruella de Vil? Yeah,
I mean, the notion that I've actually always hated the idea of a villain origin story in general, because I often think that they take somebody who is scary sometimes for their lack of completely recognizable motives, and they give them extremely Freudian and basic psychology 101 motives.
Absolutely.
I despised, for example, Hannibal Rising. I hate the idea that Hannibal is a product of a traumatic childhood, and that he got his appetite for human flesh from the villains who shaped him. Which, by the way, Cruella is not like that film in many ways, but there is a certain aspect of that to Cruella as well. Leatherface is another one where I'm like, I don't need to see Leatherface's sad childhood. He is a lot scarier if he's just this force of nature and this force of insanity, this thing that cannot be explained, you know?
I wonder how much, I've never thought about this before, so it's an incomplete thought, but I wonder how much of this is influenced by true crime, because true crime is always about, what made the monster and trying to understand, like, the motives of serial killers and things like that, and I wonder to what extent that is influencing fictional storytelling.
That's interesting. I hadn't considered that. Yeah, I mean, we do kind of... I think there is an ingrained desire by people to try to understand a monster.
Oh, sure. Or just to understand anything inexplicable,
Exactly.
That's why mythology has existed throughout human people want explanations for the inexplicable, and I think maybe villain origin stories are kind of an outgrowth of that.
But how many of these characters, how many times does this really hold up to that kind of storytelling choice? I mean, how often do you watch one of these things? I mean, the most famous one is probably giving a whole prequel trilogy to Darth Vader and explaining how Darth Vader became Darth Vader. A lot of people not so satisfied with those films, and I think in general they answer a question that A, not everyone is asking, and B, they almost never answer it in a way that's all that satisfying,
Yeah, well, I think that they don't look at it in terms of, like, they always go for the easy thing, like you were saying. They always give them a traumatic childhood. Or the even dumber version of that, in my opinion, is what they do in this movie, which is to take a character detail and give it, like, a really pat explanation that is just, like, really, really... no one asked for it, number one. And number two, like, it seems like it was inserted specifically to answer this question. You know what I mean? It's not really an organic part of the story.
You're kind of dancing around this, and it happens in the first 10 minutes.
We had to sign forms to watch this movie.
Look, the movie is out now. You can watch it. You can see it in theaters, or you can watch it on Disney Plus. I want to reveal something that happens in the first 10 minutes of this movie because
it's the beginning of the movie.
It's the beginning of the film. I fucking howled with laughter when this happened, which is not the intended reaction, I don't think, but it was so funny to me.
He didn't just howl with laughter. He messaged in all caps.
So they reveal...
Tell him, Dowd.
They reveal in the beginning of this film, the first few minutes of this film is like Cruella de Vil's childhood. We even see her being born.
Yeah, literally. It's like the opening moments is like her being born.
Yep. And this prologue portion of the film, before Emma Stone takes over the role of Cruella as an adult Cruella de Vil, this portion ends with Cruella's mother being killed by Dalmatians.
Murdered by Dalmatians. I don't know if you've ever... Dalmatians, in my experience, are not mean dogs. They are stupid, happy-go-lucky dogs. They're very inbred, and so they tend to not be very smart.
They're super vicious in this movie.
Apparently, yeah.
Yeah, a trio of Dalmatians kill her mother. There's a little bit more to it than that, I guess, but it's very funny to me that whoever... It actually speaks to the whole galaxy brain enterprise of this film, that they felt the need to explain why she might have it out for Dalmatians.
Yeah, why she doesn't like Dalmatians specifically.
Exactly.
Yeah.
There's a lot about this I found completely ridiculous, honestly. I don't know exactly how you felt about it.
I'm like kind of mixed on it. I'm honestly surprised by the positive sentiment online. I think people have low standards if they think that this is a delightful film. I'm sorry. It had a lot of good visual elements to it, but just the storytelling was so dopey and so... the thing for me that I found the most puzzling about this film was that it was really trying to... it felt very compromised to me in the sense that they tried to go for a more edgy backstory. Because, like, if you think about it, Cruella de Vil, like, even if Dalmatians did kill her mom, she's... cruel to animals, and that's really hard for a lot of people to swallow, animal cruelty. Like, there is a website called Does the Dog Die?
Yeah.
Because people have a harder time seeing animals get hurt in movies than people. And so I think because of that kind of darkness of that kind of hovers underneath this movie, they go for some more PG-13 rated elements. Like, there's one scene where one of Cruella's henchmen is like, tell me you won't... They're about to do a heist or something, and he says, well, tell me you won't kill anyone when we do this. And she goes, I can't promise that. Which is like, the whole thing with the morality in films that are made for kids is that it's supposed to be you're not supposed to have that kind of moral ambiguity in films that are for children, right? That's like, that's an automatic PG-13, I believe. But at the same time, you have scenes of like cute little puppies helping them steal diamonds that are very much for kids, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think you were getting at,
I don't know what,
like, why this thing is so misguided, I think, in basic even construction. I mean, you're right that, like, it's a Disney product, so this thing can't be, the Cruella de Vil we meet in the 60s original or even in the 90s live action ones. She's a monster. I mean, she basically is a bad person. And the notion that the character we meet in this is somehow going to become her, it just doesn't track, because ultimately the movie does not want to risk us genuinely disliking this character. It's our main character, basically.
And it's 132 minutes.
Oh my God, yeah. Listen,
you need to like her if you're going to spend that much goddamn time with her.
Katie, I am not the type of person who ever is going to make that in my opinion, very, very dumb argument that all movies should be 90 minutes. I'm not the type of person who thinks that we shouldn't have long movies, or even that a popcorn movie can't be long. But I will say that this movie challenges my assertions about that, because I do not think we need a Cruella de Vil origin story that is 2 hours and 15 minutes long.
I think it speaks to the self-seriousness of the Enterprise.
Length.
Yeah.
Yeah, but there is an identity crisis at the center of it, because you're right that it is very self-serious about giving us the, it's tempting to cite Joker, but this was in production before that movie came out, which doesn't mean it didn't take some cues from it along the way at some point.
Well, the character of the Joker has been popular since The Dark Knight.
That's very true, yeah. But it reminds me a lot of the Oscar the Grouch SNL parody of Joker that hit when that trailer dropped, where they're just like, we're going to take a character from your childhood and make them gritty.
That's exactly what this film is doing.
Yeah.
But it still tries to have it both ways with the Disney thing by having, these kind of cute and cuddly moments.
It does want to have it both ways. It also, I think this thing wants to be a sort of fun, rambunctious jukebox good time as well. The psychology is all very, very serious, but it's directed in a way that suggests that this is sort of supposed to be a kind of a party for the adults watching, I guess.
A little bit, yeah. It's got a lot of Scorsese tracking shots in it.
Yes.
There's one very long Scorsese tracking shot that I was watching it and being like, I think I'm supposed to feel something.
Well, so Craig Gillespie directed it, and he made I, Tonya, and I had the same thought watching I, Tonya, that this was a movie that was desperate to be a Martin Scorsese film. I sort of call it Diet Scorsese, which is how it feels to me, because it has a lot of his tricks, but not a lot of the kind of harder psychology of his films.
Yeah.
But one of the things it does is that it is a total jukebox run through of all the most obvious needle drops you could ever imagine. Can I read a few of them?
Yeah, go ahead.
This is a sample.
I'm going to tell you my most obvious one. Can I say my most obvious one right off the bat? Sympathy for the Devil. The Devil. They play Sympathy for the Devil, the Rolling Stone song, and I'm just like, okay.
Which, again, is very Scorsese,
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
A kind of blunt Rolling Stones needle drop, that's super Scorsese.
Also, this might qualify as a spoiler on some level, too, but that is not just a song they play in the movie. That is the final song before the credits.
Yep.
Sympathy for the Devil. Here are a few other songs that will come up over the course of Cruella. These Boots Are Made for Walking, She's a Rainbow, 5 to 1, Hush, Car Wash, One Way or Another, Should I Stay or Should I Go, which, by the way, released in 1981, after the time period of this film. Not to be
it's a
nitpicky.
mess. The subcultural time period of this is a complete fucking mess. It is the 60s and the 80s at the same time.
Yeah, can we talk about that? Because I think technically it's maybe supposed to be the 70s.
It's supposed to be 75, I believe.
Oh, okay. I did the math on that, and that makes sense if you think of this as a prequel to the live action 101 Dalmatians, because Stone is in her early 30s. Glenn Close was in her 50s, in the 90s. So technically you could look at this and say that it is a prequel to the live-action 101 Dalmatians set in the 90s. So that makes sense, I guess. But watching it, this could be any number of time periods.
Yeah, no, and it is true that like you'll hear songs on the radio in 2021 from 2015. You know, like that is true. But like you said, there are songs in the movie that are from after the movie was released. Yeah. There is Hush, which also appeared in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. Mm-hmm. Yep. There's Rolling Stones' Needle Drops, the Scorsese signature. Like, to me, the soundtrack of this film, it was mostly songs I had heard before. They also played Time of the Season by the Zombies, which is a very common, very well-known song. Like, I'm surprised they didn't play Season of the Witch by Donovan. That would have just completed the sort of musical obviousness of the soundtrack. And to me, I was watching it going like, okay, if I knew like a 13-year-old kid and I was trying to be like, here's some cool British music, like I would maybe give them that. But as an adult, like I knew all these songs already. It didn't really do anything for me in that way.
Do you think that's the target audience for this movie? Because watching it, I could not figure out who this movie is really supposed to be for.
I gave it some thought, and the best I can figure is it is for, like, preteens who are kind of interested in, like, fashion, but they're not quite old enough, they're not preteens.
I sort of like that.
Preteens who watch RuPaul's Drag Race.
Right.
Honestly, I think would be the target audience for this film, which is quite a few preteens, actually. So
yeah.
It seemed like a very gateway to coolness movie to me. Like if you didn't know anything about swingin' London or punk London or if you didn't know anything about that and you were a little younger and you just know you like, fashion and artifice and that kind of stuff, then you might be really super into this movie. And in that way, I think it's fine.
I actually kind of like that, honestly, because I agree, and there's a way that you could look at this thing and you could say, well, so if its target audience is people who grew up on Disney movies, but they want to graduate to something a little bit more, they're getting a little too old for something like 101 Dalmatians, honestly.
Exactly.
This could be a gateway into that, and I think that is about the most charitable argument for this movie's existence that you could make, because I kept watching it thinking, like, what, like, kids, like actual little kids, are going to be bored through this.
No, it's not for little kids. They're going to be bored, number one, and they're going to be traumatized, number two.
Exactly, scared occasionally. And no, I mean, other than maybe, like, I actually thought maybe Disney adults would be into this. Like people adults who love going to Disney theme parks and who are.
I have my thoughts on Disney adults. I won't hear them here.
Okay, well we'll let the listeners imagine what those thoughts might be.
We'll let that hang in the air. Yeah. I'm glad they're finally getting their reckoning.
Yeah, so I can sort of understand this as something for 13-year-olds. I like that argument for it, and I actually think that that's a good target demographic to say that if we have any 13-year-old listeners, I sort of doubt that we do, but if we have any, this might be a movie for you.
I think also if you're the parent of a 13-year-old, another thing for me that I thought of is that, like, this movie is also kind of for, like, cool parents. There's that Onion headline that we always reference because it describes a lot of our coworkers as, like, father ruins daughter's interactions with her peers by introducing her to classic records or something like that. Like, if you're one of those kind of parents, then, like, this movie is a convenient shorthand to teaching your kid about a lot of stuff that was going on in England in the 70s.
It's just so pandering in that way,
glam rock's in it, too.
Yeah.
Well, that's why it's for kids. That's why it's for 13-year-olds.
Yeah, I suppose. It does also seem to have been made from an understanding that Cruella has, like, a camp following,
I guess so. Yeah. There is some queer baiting in this movie a little bit. Disney likes to make a big deal about including gay characters in its films. In this film, there is a androgynous glam rock character who is sort of implied to be, somewhere, gender queer or somewhere in the LGBTQ spectrum, and they don't hammer it too hard, but it is in there, and I don't know, I have a lot of feelings like that. I think Disney is copping out and trying to get credit for something that it's not actually doing.
I think it's worse than that. I think that they are not only thirsty for that kind of, like,
the validation.
Yeah, they're thirsty for that validation while also being very careful not to alienate anyone in their audience who might be genuinely bothered by, like,
exactly.
say, a gay character kissing a man or something, you know?
Right, exactly. They'll never have a gay character with a love interest in one of these movies, like, ever.
The queer representation in modern Disney films feels about equivalent to the larger culture's embrace of gay characters in the 90s, to me, to be honest.
Oh, that's very interesting.
Like, they exist. Well, we will allow them to exist within our world, but don't worry, you will not be confronted with anything that makes you uncomfortable.
Right. Yeah, totally. But the thing that bothers me the most about it is they seem to want to be celebrated for it.
Oh, 100%. They want credit for it. It was like the Avengers Endgame thing where the Russo brothers made a huge deal about there being a gay character, and it was a character who I don't think even has a name in the film. He's in a focus group at the beginning of Endgame and has like 2 lines of dialogue, and that's fucking it, you know?
And that's it. And isn't his husband dead? He's talking
his
about
husband's
dead
dead as well. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, so I mean, to not dance around it anymore, I think like maybe queer preteens might really like this. You know, like little budding baby gays might be really into it.
Yeah.
Because it is. I would describe the plot of this film as Oliver Twist meets The Devil Wears Prada. I think
That's
it's
a
kind
great
of those
comparison.
two plots.
Yeah.
Crossed together, and the writer of The Devil Wears Prada was one of the writers on the film, so
makes sense.
Probably shouldn't be much of a surprise. One thing that I want to talk about with you, Dowd, is Tony McNamara, who wrote The Favorite, is one of 5 credited screenwriters on this film. I didn't see his touch in here at all.
No, I mean, maybe with some of a little bit of like the cattiness of it. Maybe. Because, I mean, one of the better things about this film, I think, is that it occasionally allows Emma Stone and Emma Thompson, the 2 Emmas, to just sort of be haughty at each other. We haven't talked a ton about the plot, but basically the plot finds Emma Stone's Cruella de Vil as an adult woman after her mother is killed by Dalmatians. She grows up, she joins like an Oliver Twistian group of
pickpockets.
Of pickpocket kids, and she ends up through a series of events, she ends up working for a major fashion designer in 1975 in London, played by Emma Thompson, who's sort of she is very much doing The Devil Wears Prada. She's like this very unforgiving boss who's treats all her employees
fabulous
like shit.
And she's very mean.
Right, exactly. Yeah. So there is a certain fun to be had in watching these 2 actresses snipe at each other and try to, because in a way they're kind of both doing Cruella de Vil, if you think about it.
Yes, that's true. That's true. They are.
Like Emma Stone is the nascent developing version, whereas Emma Thompson is sort of an alternate version of Cruella de Vil that influences her. So there are scenes where the 2 of them are in the frame together, and I sort of enjoyed the interaction between them. For one thing, I think Emma Stone is well cast as a cartoon character. I think she has a kind of expressiveness as an actor and an ability to sort of twist her features in a very cartoonish way that works. She's playing a character that I think is completely incoherent in this film. I think the conception of Cruella de Vil, again, and I think that comes down to the movie both wanting us to love her and to imagine that she could grow into a character that we love to hate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. It's right. And I think that I think that they were trying to do something that was a little bit edgier, but it ended up getting that kind of blunted off by the sheer fact that it was run through the Walt Disney Company.
Yeah, you can't do edgy with Disney. You just really can't.
You can't.
It's not possible.
You really can't.
I just think this thing is peak content, is how it felt to me. You know, like we had a character we can do something with. Let's do it. And you get a filmmaker like Gillespie who clearly has some sort of style and sense of what he wants to do with it. And I guess maybe he should be celebrated for getting it halfway there anyway.
It's more interesting than some of the live action remakes because it is kind of nutty, because you are kind of asking yourself questions the whole time. Like I said to I like paused the movie to go, what the fuck? More than once.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I was amused by it in ways that I think were often unintentional, to be honest.
Yeah. But it also tries to ride this camp line, and so it is a little bit ambiguous there.
For sure.
I think that all the kind of like goofy mythology details that we're talking about were not intentional, but I think there is a little bit of archness, intentional archness in the film as a whole. But I think it takes the whole character of Cruella very seriously, and that's where it ends up not quite clicking for me.
Right. Well, that's the stuff that I found the funniest, too. Them attempting to give Cruella de Vil, of all characters, some sort of tortured backstory and to run her through all these cliches that origin stories have. Another really funny detail that maybe it was just funny to me, but the moral center of this film is Jasper, the skinny henchman from 101 Dalmatians.
Yep.
He's like the voice of reason in the film. You may remember Jasper. He's the skinny one. You know, she has the two henchmen. Well played by Joel Fry in this film. I liked his performance. It just felt like I had to constantly stop myself and be like, oh yeah, that's one of the dog napping goons in 101 Dalmatians.
Yep. Maybe the sequel will be his origin story. I like to think he was a cartoon mouse that got turned into a person. That's his backstory. One thing I will say about this film, like I said, I don't think it really holds much appeal for adults beyond the fact that it is like it's a visual treat at times. It's all about fashion and glamour, and there are some really good costumes in it, and some of the settings are very lush, and I think in that way, like visually, it's interesting to look at, but I'm not quite sure that justifies the running time.
It definitely doesn't, in my opinion. But I will agree with you that this is more interesting than some of the recent Disney remakes. I mean, I would certainly take this over The Lion King, a film which I think is completely artistically bankrupt. This at least is attempting something. It's at least attempting to tell a new story. It's doing a little bit more than simply stoking our nostalgia. A little bit.
But, again, Disney wants a lot of praise for doing the bare minimum, and I think maybe this is another example of that.
Yeah, maybe we don't give it to them,
That's all we've got for you this week. A Quiet Place Part 2 and Cruella are in theaters now. A Quiet Place Part 2 will be on Paramount Plus on July 12th, and Cruella is available on Disney Plus now. Thanks for listening to Film Club. Please be sure to rate, review, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.
This week's episode of Film Club was hosted by me, Alex Dowd, and by Katie Rife. Produced and edited by Carl Blomberg. Our sound mixer and finishing editor is Zach Goldsboro, and our motion graphics designer is Julie Mullins. Check back next week when we'll have a brand new episode of Film Club. We're going to be talking about the Conjuring franchise. Thanks all.
Bye.